In Victorian England, some of the quietest nurseries were the most dangerous. Babies slept for hours, sometimes days, without stirring. Their mothers believed they had found the perfect remedy for crying and restlessness. But the secret wasn't comfort, or care, or even luck. It was a sweet, syrupy liquid laced with one of the most addictive and deadly drugs in history, opium. And for decades, it was given to infants as casually as we give cough syrup today. Victorian England was an age of invention, empire, and strict social codes, but also of harsh realities. The Industrial Revolution had pulled families from rural villages into crowded, polluted cities. For the wealthy, nurseries were staffed with nannies and wet nurses, but for the poor, childcare was an exhausting, solitary duty. Mothers were expected to manage the home, cook, clean, and if their husbands' wages were too low, take in laundry or work outside. There was no parental leave, no daycare, and no knowledge of child psychology as we understand it today. A crying baby was seen less as a sign of need and more as a disruption to be silenced quickly. In an age when infant mortality was already high from disease and poor sanitation, a fussy child wasn't just exhausting, it could be seen as a threat to a family's fragile stability. And in that pressure cooker environment, parents became easy targets for a booming new industry, promising one simple thing: a quiet child. By the mid-1800s, the streets of London, Manchester, and Liverpool were plastered with posters advertising miracle cures. Bottles and jars lined shop shelves, each promising to heal, soothe, or revive, no doctor required. These were the patent medicines, a booming industry built on hope, clever marketing, and almost no regulation. The name was misleading. Most of these concoctions weren't patented at all. They were simply branded, bottled, and sold with bold claims, often without revealing their ingredients. Some were harmless mixtures of herbs and sugar water. Others were laced with potent drugs: alcohol, chloroform, morphine, and opium. Opium was cheap, easy to obtain, and astonishingly effective at dulling pain and inducing sleep. It had been used for centuries in adult medicine, but now it was being bottled and marketed directly to mothers for their children. These products carried names that sounded safe and wholesome, names that masked the danger inside. And at the heart of this new market was one particularly deadly category: soothing syrups designed specifically for babies. In Victorian Britain, a restless child could be silenced with a teaspoon of what seemed like an innocent remedy. It was called soothing syrup, and it was marketed as a mother's best friend. These syrups were sweet, easy to swallow, and astonishingly effective at making babies sleep. The secret ingredient was laudanum, a potent tincture of opium mixed with alcohol. In adult medicine, laudanum was used to treat everything from coughs to diarrhea. In the nursery, it was used for teething pain, colic, fevers, and most dangerously, simply to keep a child quiet. Mothers were told these syrups were safe, even beneficial. The labels spoke of calming the nerves and easing discomfort. Some brands even claimed to strengthen the constitution, as if the drug was nourishing rather than numbing. Among the most popular was Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, which proudly advertised itself as the mother's friend and the child's best remedy. It was sold in corner shops, shipped overseas, and trusted in homes across the British Empire. Few parents knew that with every spoonful, they were feeding their child one of the most addictive substances in human history. And for the poorest families, the use of opium-laced syrups wasn't just a choice, it was often a necessity. For Britain's working poor, life in the mid-19th century was a constant struggle for survival. Industrial cities demanded long hours in factories, textile mills, and workshops. Many mothers had no choice but to return to work just days after giving birth, leaving older siblings or sometimes neighbors to watch over infants. But caring for a baby while earning a wage was nearly impossible. Crying could disturb a crowded workroom, and employers had little patience for distracted workers. A quiet child wasn't just a convenience, it could mean keeping a job and a roof overhead. Soothing syrups became the perfect solution. They were cheap, easy to buy, and required no skill or special care. A spoonful before work could keep an infant asleep for hours, sometimes the entire day. It was, in the eyes of many desperate parents, a blessing. In the poorest neighborhoods, opium was so common that it was sold in open bowls in general stores, measured out by the penny's worth. Laudanum and syrups became as much a part of household staples as bread or coal. But the same properties that made these remedies so effective also made them lethal, especially for tiny bodies that could not withstand their strength. In Victorian shop windows, the labels were bright, the promises bold, and the language comforting. To a weary mother, these bottles looked like salvation. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup led the pack, its advertisements painting it as a gentle, trusted solution for all complaints of infants and children. The ads showed cherubic babies, peaceful in their cribs, and mothers smiling with relief. There was no hint of danger, no mention that each dose contained enough morphine to sedate an adult. Other brands followed the same pattern. Godfrey's Cordial, Kendall Black Drop, and Street's Infant Quietness all promised to settle the stomach or ease the nerves. The wording was carefully chosen to imply medical authority while avoiding any detail about the true contents. The companies knew the truth. The real selling point was silence. A child under the influence of opium didn't cry, didn't fuss, and didn't demand attention to many parents, especially those balancing work, poverty, and multiple children. This was irresistible. But the quiet came at a cost. The same sedative effect that stilled their cries slowed their breathing, dulled their reflexes, and sometimes stopped their hearts entirely. Opium is a powerful narcotic. In adults, it slows the nervous system, dulls pain, and induces a heavy, dreamlike sleep. But in infants whose bodies are still developing, its effects are far more dangerous. When a baby was given a spoonful of soothing syrup, the morphine it contained quickly entered the bloodstream. It numbed the nerves, stilled the muscles, and calmed the brain's activity. Breathing became slower. Heart rate dropped. The baby would slip into a deep, unnatural sleep, sometimes for many hours. In small doses, it appeared miraculous. But the line between small and fatal was razor thin. Infants have little body mass, and even a slightly stronger dose, perhaps because a bottle had settled unevenly, could overwhelm them. The same mechanism that stopped the crying could quietly stop the child's breathing altogether. There was another hidden danger. Repeated doses built dependence. The child's body would crave the drug, and without it, symptoms like restlessness, sweating, and inconsolable crying would return. Parents, believing the baby was sick again, would give more syrup, deepening the cycle. And still, most families had no idea they were risking their child's life. That ignorance began to crumble only when a handful of voices dared to speak out. By the mid-1800s, a small number of doctors and public health officials had begun to notice a troubling pattern. Infants brought into clinics, pale, underweight, unresponsive, often came from homes where soothing syrups were a daily habit. Medical journals carried cautious reports. Some physicians wrote of babies who had stopped breathing after a dose too freely given. Others warned that long-term use left children weak, listless, and slow to develop. But these warnings rarely reached the people who needed them most. There was no legal requirement for medicine makers to print ingredients on their labels. No law compelled them to mention dosage limits, side effects, or risks. Advertisements continued to run in newspapers, promising relief and ignoring danger. And many working-class families trusted these remedies precisely because they had been on the market for decades. Even when child deaths were clearly linked to opium syrup, blame often fell elsewhere on poor sanitation, malnutrition, or frailty from birth. The connection between the sweet-tasting medicine and the silent crib remained hidden from public view. It would take tragedy after tragedy to make the truth impossible to ignore. The change began with stories too shocking to dismiss. Newspapers started printing accounts of infants who had died within hours of taking a harmless syrup. Some were only a few weeks old. Others had been given the medicine daily for months, their bodies slowly succumbing to its grip. Inquests revealed the same pattern. mothers insisting they followed the instructions, doctors confirming the presence of opium in the child's system, and coroners ruling death by overdose. Yet the bottles still lined the shelves, untouched by regulation. One case in the 1870s shook the nation. A coroner's report found that a single bottle of Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup contained enough morphine to kill dozens of infants. The manufacturer denied wrongdoing, claiming the deaths were the result of careless administration rather than the product itself. Public health campaigners seized on these tragedies. Pamphlets warned mothers to avoid quack medicines. Social reformers spoke of the syrups as tools of neglect, even calling them infant poisons. But the companies fought back with bigger advertisements, glowing testimonials, and claims that critics were exaggerating. The battle for truth had begun, but without laws to protect the public, parents were still left to decide for themselves. By the late 19th century, the public's patience was wearing thin. Reformers, journalists, and doctors pushed for change, but the road to regulation was slow and bitterly contested. The patent medicine industry was immensely profitable, and manufacturers had powerful allies in Parliament. Progress came in small steps. The Pharmacy Act of 1868 was one of the first measures to control dangerous drugs, requiring that opium could only be sold by licensed chemists. But there was a loophole. Prepared syrups and cordials for infants were often exempt. Companies argued that their products were not pure opium, but safe mixtures, and so they continued to sell freely. It wasn't until investigative journalists began exposing the exact contents of these syrups that momentum grew. Articles detailed the shocking levels of morphine in some bottles. Public lectures warned mothers of the hidden dangers lurking behind the comforting labels. By the early 1900s, mounting public outrage, combined with growing scientific evidence, forced the government's hand. Laws tightened. Ingredients had to be listed. Packaging carried warnings, and the free sale of opium-laced infant medicines began to disappear from British shops. But for thousands of families, these changes came far too late. By the 1910s, the golden age of the patent medicine trade was coming to an end. Ingredient labeling became mandatory. Restrictions tightened on the sale of opium, morphine, and other narcotics. Soothing syrups for infants, once a fixture in nearly every Victorian home, were now seen for what they truly were: dangerous, addictive drugs disguised as remedies. Mothers turned to safer alternatives, guided by a growing field of public health education. Doctors and midwives promoted fresh air, better nutrition, and careful nursing over quick chemical fixes. The very idea of dosing a baby with opium began to shift from common sense to unthinkable. Yet the legacy of that era lingers. It stands as a cautionary tale of how trust, convenience, and desperation can be exploited, and how dangerous a product can be when sold without oversight. Victorian parents were not malicious. Most truly believed they were helping their children. But they lived in a world where the label on a bottle mattered more than the truth inside it. Today, we look back on the quiet Victorian nurseries and understand the terrible irony: the very thing that brought peace to the home also brought harm to the child. And in that silence, history whispers its warning.